All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the paper discussion. This is not even a paper discussion. This is a first reaction video. I'm also still trying to figure out what we're going to do here. But the idea is that I will run you through the kind of questions that have been asked. देखते हैं कि क्या सवाल आए हैं, कैसे सवाल आए हैं. फिर उन सवालों को देखने के बाद समझते हैं कि भाई क्या ये पेपर मुश्किल था, नहीं था, इसको पढ़ने के लिए हमें और क्या करना चाहिए, क्या नहीं करना चाहिए, एंड सो ऑन एंड सो फोर्थ. शुरू करने से पहले एक बात हमें समझना ज़रूरी है that 2013 was when the pattern was changed and GS 1234 was introduced as specific GS papers, and 2023 marks a 10-year anniversary of the pattern change. So therefore, the government being the government or the UPSC being the UPSC would look at a remarkable shift in the way questions are going to be asked 2023 onwards. Now there are 20 questions that have been asked in paper 2. Let us look at each of these questions and let's understand the kind of questions that have come. Now, first question for 10 marks. Constitutionally guaranteed judicial independence is a prerequisite of democracy, comment. Now this question is a simple theoretical question asking you to link two things. One, for you to be a good democracy, not only do you need to have judicial independence, you need to have a constitutionally guaranteed judicial independence. So the answer to this question would have been, what is judicial independence? How do we constitutionally guarantee it? What is the relationship between judicial independence and democracy? How does constitutionally guaranteeing it make it better? And if there is a gap between all of this, how do we essentially fulfill it? So there are some constitutional provisions. There have also been certain attempts that have been taken in the past. But the idea is constitutional judicial independence. An important question. This particular question, judicial independence, has been asked in the larger context of a larger debate around how Supreme Court and High Court judges are chosen or transferred between the High Court to the Supreme Court. We've seen statements that have been made by the Honorable Law Minister. We've seen statements that have been made by the Honorable Chief Justice of India. And there have been sort of a battle of the words between each of these two functionaries. So this question is essentially right out of your textbook in terms of the current affairs being relevant from the last 6 to 8 months approaching up to the mains in September 2023. So therefore, this question was a straightforward one. And if you remember, the National Judicial Appointments Commission was the last remarkable thing that had happened with respect to all of this. Now the 99th Constitutional Amendment. So that could also be contextualized and we'll get into a lot more detail later on. But the idea is this question was a doable question. I will not call this question a particularly easy question. I would certainly call this question a medium question, not a tough question, but a medium question, because you have to explain to the examiner, as the question critically asks you to, the relationship between constitutionally guaranteeing judicial independence and the functioning of a democracy. That relationship is a conceptual one. That relationship is an analytical one. So the key to answering this question is not just about bursting out provisions or judgments or committee recommendations. You have to explain to the examiner as to why constitutionally guaranteeing judicial independence is essential for a functioning or a vibrant democracy. That's the first question. The second question, who are entitled to receive free legal aid? Assess the role of the National Legal Services Authority in rendering free legal aid in India. Now, this particular question, as much as PYQs are important for the mains, they're also equally important for the pre. And in the last 10 years, there have been several questions on NALSA and legal aid in general in the prelims exam. In fact, when one of the questions in the prelims in the previous years, there was a dedicated question that said, who among the following is entitled to legal aid? If you've gone through that question in the previous years, you would be able to answer the first part of it. The second part is, assess the role of the National Legal Services Authority in rendering free legal aid in India, which essentially means, what does it do? Is it doing a good job? And what more can it do to make its job better? Remember, this is a 10 marker, which means you do not have more than 150 words to write. So you will have enough content and you would be battling a challenge with respect to what not to write as opposed to what to write. But the question is very clear and straightforward. So a 10 marker, I would call this question an easy question, or somewhere is a midpoint between easy or medium. It is again certainly not a tough question. Now, question number 3. The states in India seem reluctant to empower urban local bodies both functionally as well as financially. Now, this question has multiple variables in this. The first is, the states in India seem reluctant, which means we know our basics that local self-government is in the state list. So while through the 73rd and the 74th Amendment, you can give a structure and an institutionalized mechanism for local self-government, the actual powers of the local self-government are at the discretion of the states, which is why the 11th and the 12th schedule are optional schedules in the Constitution of India. The states will implement them as per their own discretion, as per their own will. So there is a general reluctance of states with respect to local self-government in as a whole. Now this question is more specific about why are the states not very keen to empower the urban local bodies, the municipalities, the corporations, the wards, both functionally and financially, which means, why are you simply not devolving the 12th schedule? And secondly, why are you not giving them adequate funds for them to work to the fullest of their capacity? A theoretical question, an easy question. I've definitely covered this in a fair amount of detail. Now, question number 4. Compare and contrast the British and the Indian approaches to parliamentary sovereignty, which basically means, how is the parliament supreme in India versus how is the parliament supreme in the UK? Now, this is a comparative constitutional law question, and the deductions of the means PYQs stand absolutely valid. They ask you US, UK, France, and at the most, if at all, another country if it has been in the news. But the 3 primary countries that they've always asked you is the US, the UK, and France. And they have sort of circled back to each of these 3. Now the question is, why are they asking you this in 2023? Of course, because the United Kingdom has a new Prime Minister, and of course we have great ties with the new Prime Minister for reasons that we all know. But the idea is, compare and contrast how the Parliament is placed in India versus how the Parliament is placed in the UK. A basic functional difference between the two is that in the UK, because there is no written constitution in a single codified document, the Parliament has a higher standing and therefore can change all constitutional laws because there is no single constitution. The Parliament is therefore more supreme and truly supreme in the UK as compared to India, where in India you are bound by a single written constitution, and even the Parliament cannot violate that constitution, cannot take away the essence of that constitution, and of course you have the basic structure doctrine which applies. Very simple question, basically comparing the British parliamentary system versus the Indian parliamentary system, everyone should have been able to answer this question easily. So, this is a question which is an easy question. Now, I find this question to be particularly intriguing for a multiple number of reasons. If you read question number 5 rather carefully, you'll understand what we're trying to get to. Discuss the role of presiding officers of state legislatures in maintaining order and impartiality in conducting legislative work and in facilitating the best democratic practices. Now, because of incidences that were reported in the states of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka and West Bengal over the last 6 to 8 months, there was a valid reason for you to be asked this question. However, you don't have to prepare presiding officers of state legislatures more specifically. If you think about it rather carefully, whether it is the presiding officer at the parliament or whether it is the presiding officer at the state legislative level, the functions are more or less the same. So, even if you write keeping the presiding officers of the central houses in mind and just tweak it to state legislatures, the answer would more or less remain the same. Because the question is about the role which is played by presiding officers, and the presiding officers perform a similar role. The only difference is in the second houses, where the presiding officers of the second houses of the states, which is your state legislative council, is also elected from within the house, whereas the presiding officer of the second house of the parliament, which is the Rajya Sabha, happens to be the ex officio vice president of India. Anyway, but an easy question. Think about the presiding officers of the parliament and write about state legislatures. You would still be able to answer this question appropriately. Now, question number 6. Now, this is a question because of the fluctuations that have happened in the Human Development Index report. The crucial aspect of development process has been the inadequate attention paid to human resource development in India. Suggest measures that can address this inadequacy. Now, this question is a combination of 2 lines in your main syllabus. The first is the development process and the development industry, and the second is your human resources development, and both of them have been separately but categorically mentioned in GS paper 2. The question basically is being asked is that as far as human development in India is concerned, as far as the development process of India is concerned, you haven't focused on HRD as much as you should have focused. This is a very simple question. We've looked at institutional buildings, we've looked at sectoral growth, we've looked at infrastructural growth, but have we truly empowered people to be self-sufficient? A subsidy does not solve the problem of development, and that is why it's widely said that a subsidy is a politician's dream but an economist's nightmare. Now, again, a simple question written in a convoluted manner, but a simple question nonetheless. Now, question number 7. Now, this is a question which I think is a little bit of a tough question. Discuss the role of the Competition Commission of India in containing the abuse of dominant position by the multilateral corporations or by the multinational corporations in India. Refer to the recent decisions. Now, the problem with this question is that not only does this question require you to understand what the Competition Commission of India does, it also requires you to understand what the Competition Act of 2002 is. And if you thought the story ended there, well, it did not. Because then they also ask you recent decisions that have played a role with respect to the Competition Commission of India. Now, this has been in the context of Paytm, it has been in the context of the Play Store, it has been in the context of Amazon. There have been several very crucial rulings by the Competition Commission of India. Now, abuse of dominant position is simply a legal way of saying preventing monopolization of a certain sector. By the virtue of a company having a larger share or a larger reach, you cannot take that larger reach to mean disadvantage to the general principles of fair play in a sector. This, I would admit, is a tough question. I think all of us would have missed it while preparing for it. Having said that, what is the Competition Act? What is the Competition Commission of India? And what is the abuse of dominant position is something which is commonly known. Remember, the tougher the question in terms of its placement in the syllabus, the simpler it is in terms of what is being asked. It has asked you three simple things. One, the role of the Competition Commission, but in respect to containing abuse of dominant position. Two, the recent decisions. And three, your takeaway from it. Again, a 10 marker. You could have at least written something from here and come back. But yes, this was a tough question for most people. Now, the 8th question. I would say the 8th question has been framed in a slightly not very good manner. E-governance, as a critical tool of governance, has ushered in effectiveness, transparency, and accountability in governments. What inadequacies hamper the enhancement of these features? So the question is actually a very simple one. It is saying that e-governance is supposed to be effective, is supposed to be transparent, it is supposed to be accountable. What is stopping e-governance from being effective, transparent, and accountable? It's that simple. So this is a general question on e-governance. All of you would have prepared a 2-3 pager consolidated note and you should have been able to write this answer. This was a fairly easy question as far as your governance is concerned. Now, the 9th question. This has been a little bit of a yoker. The virus of conflict is affecting the functioning of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There have been SCO summits this year, and therefore this is dead in front of you with respect to current affairs. The question was that with respect to how the SCO functions, there are inherent conflicts that exist amongst the nations, amongst nations between the two of them, between two or more, or within the region. So therefore, everybody has a bias or everybody has an agenda when you're sitting together on an SCO table trying to figure out what needs to be done or what doesn't need to be done. So this is your 9th question. I would say it's a medium or slightly less than medium, an easy to medium kind of a question, depending on where you stand in the process. It should have not really been a problem as such. Now, next, question number 10. Diaspora has been done and dusted. So they've asked you diaspora on South Asia, Southeast Asia, and West Asia before. So the only thing that was left was the western part of the world. The question was, Indian diaspora has scaled new heights in the West. Describe its economic and political benefits for India. Of course, the sitting Vice President of the US, the Prime Minister of UK, there are several leaders in the national arena who come from Indian origin in some form or another. That's a proud moment. A standard format question, an easy question, should have been able to be answered without a doubt. Then comes the 11th question, which I think is a fantastic question. The question is, the Constitution of India is a living instrument with capabilities of enormous dynamism. It is a constitution made for a progressive society. Illustrate with special reference to the expanding horizons of the right to life and personal liberty. Now, of course, the landmark that has happened with right to life and personal liberty has been the fact that we have the right to privacy as an implied fundamental right in lieu of the Puttaswamy judgment. Now, we are also looking at approximately 5 years to the Puttaswamy judgment. So, let's not forget that. So, that could be a context to that. So, in the context of that, there is a larger question with respect to A, is the Constitution an organic document? B, the Constitution has evolved to meet the newer challenges that the country faces? C, the heart of the Constitution and the heart of the Constitution lies with Article 21, and we have seen an enormous interpretation, an enormous scalability of the meanings and the dimensions of Article 21. This again was an easy question because all of you would have prepared rigidity and flexibility of the Constitution, and you would have prepared the evolution of Article 21 as a whole. Could have been answered rather easily, rather simply, or specifically. Now, next question. Explain the constitutional perspectives of gender justice with the help of relevant constitutional provisions and case laws. This is a merger of two parts. The first part is you're looking at significant provisions of the Constitution, and two, majoritively, you're looking at vulnerable sections. Again, women is a categorical vulnerable section, and therefore this is a standard format question. What are the constitutional provisions safeguarding women? What are the different judgments around it? Where are the gaps, and what more can we do with respect to all of this? It's a very, very open-ended question. You would be struggling to figuring out what not to write, because not only do you have constitutional provisions, you have specific laws, and so on and so forth. So a good question nonetheless. Now, question number 13. This is a 12 again, I think is an easy question. 13, I would say, is a medium question. Account for the legal and political factors responsible for the reduced frequency of using Article 356 by the Union government since the mid-1990s, which basically means that we are imposing lesser state emergencies of president rules since 1990. Why is that the case? Explain with respect to legal and political factors. So the legal factors would therefore mean the provisions and the judgments around it. The political factors would mean how political parties, governments, how a majority party, how there are regional parties, how the interactions are shaping up. A very good question, because you have merged sort of the Representation of People's Act. You have merged a little bit of what is called the political party and the political system of the country, and you've kept your basics to 356 alive. I've done this specifically, I remember, so this should not be an issue, but yes, for most people this would have been a tough question. I would still categorize this as a medium term question. Now comes question number 14. This, I think, was an extraordinarily tricky question. Discuss the contribution of civil society groups for women's effective and meaningful participation and representation in state legislatures in India. The key here is state legislatures. Discuss the contribution of civic society groups for women's effective and meaningful participation, which means what have civil society groups done to make sure women play a more participative and a more representative role, but where? In state legislatures. The context to this has been a very small piece of news that has happened in Nagaland, where Nagaland, after 63 to 65 years, has had their very first women MLA, despite dominantly being what is called a matriarchal society. So yes, this was a tough question because the question was very specific and had 15 marks to this. The 15th question is straightforward. Explain the significance of the 101st Amendment Act, which is GST. To what extent does it reflect the accommodative spirit of federalism, which is essentially to ensure that the states also play an inclusive role in distributive taxation. Standard, easy question, everybody should have what is called a two-pager on GST. It came in 2017. You are looking at 5 years in 2022 end, so celebrating 5 years of GST. Should have not been an issue. A simple question. Up until now, I have found question number 14 more particularly precise, because this is a very different question in terms of what is being asked to you. Now, question number 16, again, very easy. explain the structure of parliamentary committee system. How far have the financial committees helped in the institutionalization of the Indian Parliament, which simply means how are parliamentary committees set up and how do financial committees help in sort of making the parliamentary system or Indian Parliament more accountable, more reflective, and helps them do their job better. Standard format, easy question, there's nothing wrong with this. Then the 17th question. The development and welfare schemes for the vulnerable by its nature are discriminatory in approach. The wording is a tough one. Development and welfare schemes for the vulnerable by its nature are discriminatory in approach. Discriminatory to whom? Do you agree? And give reasons for your answer. Now, this is a question where they want you to take a stand. The fact is a very simple one. It is, yes, they're discriminatory because they're instruments of what is called affirmative action. And they need to be discriminatory so that you can get everybody to compete on the same platform, and thereafter you would not need these eventually in the longer run. Special provisions are made because of something called equal protection of law. So yes, a tough question in terms of defending it, but in terms of content, you'll have no dearth. So overall, I'll mark this as a medium question. 18th. Skill development programs have succeeded in increasing human resources supply to various sectors. In the context of the statement, analyze the linkages between education, skill, and employment. There cannot have been a simpler question than this. It basically tells you that yes, through our Kaushal Vikas Yojanas and our Skill India mission and all of those things, we've been able to provide a workforce that is ready to work in a skilled setup across various sectors. There are no two doubts about it. The question is, in the context of this, analyze the linkages between education, skill, and employment. Does education necessarily make you employable? If it does make you employable, are you actually skillfully employed? Standard discussions, I'm sure your teachers, when they would have taught you these policies, would have covered this for you. This is a very, very easy question. And straight out of your syllabus very clearly talks about education, health and human resources. So they've linked education and human resources to employment, which is a fairly easy assumption to make. So an easy question. Now the last two questions. The expansion and strengthening of NATO and a stronger US-Europe strategic partnership works well for India. What is your opinion about this statement? Give reasons and examples to support your answer. Again, in the last 6 to 8 months, this is easy enough. But yes, the idea is this is not neighborhood, but still concerns India. I would have definitely missed this. So I would call it a medium to tough question because this is a question which is largely analytical in nature. However, there were at least 3 to 4 Indian Express editorials and about 4 to 5 Hindu editorials on the exact same issue. You would have not had a dearth of information in terms of writing the answer to this. Now the 20th question is the most surprising question. That is, they seem to leave the best for the last. Sea is an important component of the cosmos. Discuss in light of the above statement the role of the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, in protecting the environment and enhancing maritime safety and security. Now this is in context of recent environmental laws or treaties that have been finalized, but the IMO is an organization that why would we generally prepare? I would call this certainly a tough question, right? Now, in toto, how difficult was the paper? The answer to that question is a very simple one. 60% of the paper was all right, 50% of the paper was easy, 30% of the paper was medium, and 20% of the paper was tough. The UPSC has been distributing marks in paper 2 rather generously, with the highest going up to 130. I do not see that happening this year. I would see that people on an average, the best people who would have written the best answers in this would land around a 125 at the most, because the answers have to be written in a certain manner. there were certain parts that were essentially left out. But all in all, tough paper, but not something that is unmanageable. Now, with respect to how do you prepare for this, I think the standard sources remain the same. Newspapers are enough for everything except polity. Polity, you can go through your standard textbooks and the newspaper, and that is more than enough. I don't think there needs to be any change in your resources, in your reading pattern. Stick to one newspaper, stick to one source, and you're done. I don't think you require books for governance, social justice, IR, etc. Not needed at all. You should be able to answer these questions nonetheless. Right? Thank you for your time. Take care. All the best.